Good morning, everyone. This is Michele Hughes from Ageless and Timeless. I want to introduce someone today that I've been really eager to have on my podcast, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. His name is Kashif Khan, and he's the CEO of the DNA company in Toronto. And if anyone knows of the DNA company, then congratulations, because this is the greatest little secret, and it's getting to be better known now. They're doing DNA testing like it's never been done before, and I'm going to let Kashif explain that. But this is the next generation, and it's functional genomics rather than the traditional genome that you hear about on the media with 123V and all those older models. So we're in the new generation, right, Kashif? Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. Yeah, we're there. There's always innovations. We're trying to stay ahead of it.
And you are. And so why don't you give us a quick synopsis of what the DNA company is and why you're unique? And then I'm going to backtrack a little bit about you and how you came to where you are. So just give us a little summary, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So essentially, genetics, which is what everybody's familiar with, is a gene instructs a biological process, and you may be told, hey, you have an 80% chance of this disease, or you may have elevated risk of, aging quicker, whatever, an anecdotal singular meaning. What we learn is the body doesn't really work like that. It's not all these individual separated jobs, they're systems. It's much more functional. So the way your hormones operate affect your mood. The way your mood operates affects your hormones, and vice versa. And all these systems are interconnected. And so research was needed in terms of how do we take all of what's known about what each gene means and create a map that actually fits the way the body works, a functional map. And it's the same difference between when you go to the doctor, you're told what disease you have and what pill to take. And if you go to a functional medicine doctor, you're told why the disease happened. Two very different perspectives. One is, here's a symptom, here's what it's called, we're going to treat it and manage it, and you're probably going to have it for a long time, but you're not going to die. Functional medicine is, you never needed to have this. What did you eat? What did you smell? What did you breathe? What relationship? What was the inflammatory trigger? Same difference between genetics and functional genomics, which took a lot of work, but we're finally there.
That's very, very good, because a lot of people believe that once you know what your genetics are, there's nothing you can do. That's who you are. And I think the fact that you're showing that lifestyle can affect and that's where functional genomics comes, right? That your lifestyle affects.
Yeah, and that statement, if you have a gene, it's like a prescription and it's your destiny. That is true for genetic conditions, right? A certain gene variant equals a problem. That's true. The challenge is that medicine applied that same thinking to chronic disease and aging, which is not at all true. What's true for chronic disease and aging is you have a propensity, your body doesn't do a job well, and so it's more likely for you to develop this disease than other people, but you still have to cause it. And if you don't have the wrong environment, nutrition, lifestyle inputs, you'll never have a problem. If you have bad cardiovascular genetics, but you have zero stress and eat well and live on the sea and get sunshine, you probably won't get sick. If you have good cardiovascular genetics and you're a TV executive that drinks too much and has too much stress and lives in New York and breathes too much pollution, you still might get the disease. So all we're saying is that genetics tells you what to prioritize. What's my red flag? What's that thing for me that inside isn't working well? And with all of these things that I want to do, all these supplements, exercises, foods, what do I actually need to do? What's going to give me the biggest return so that I can focus on that?
So everybody should be listening to this. I really I want to emphasize this with my viewers, that if you have a roadmap that's called your genetic blueprint, you do not have to accept that you might have that predisposition to, let's say, cardiovascular disease. You do not accept that. You accept that you have the predisposition, but that you can do something about it. And this is where the human choice and lifestyle really does make a difference. So this is what we've been preaching on Ageless and Timeless for 3 years, is that you can make a difference in your health. And it's all about choice, right?
Yes, and all we're saying is now instead of trial and error, one size fits all, you can just focus on what the right choices are for you because there's some things that are counterintuitive. For example, there's some people where we have to tell them you should not be doing cardiovascular exercise. You should not be running on a treadmill. And you would think that, okay, I'm going to get healthy. One of the first things I'm going to do is exercise, right? And one of the easiest things to do is get on a bike or run. And there's some people where we have to tell them that their genetics around oxidation, when you're breathing, when you're on a treadmill and you're breathing in all that oxygen because you're breathing heavy, some people produce too many oxidants, which is the byproduct of using oxygen as fuel. The genetics around that are very easy to see. And if that's the case, and you were not designed for cardiovascular activity and you're running on a treadmill, that may be the thing that causes you the inflammation that leads to cardiovascular disease, right? So it's one layer of making choices to be healthy, but what are the right choices for me? Should I actually go become a vegan? I want to be healthy, I want to become a vegan. Great. If you have the genetics to actually produce the enzymes that break down your beans and lentils and legumes and key protein sources, you'll probably do well. If you don't have the genetics for that, you might feel good in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, but then all of a sudden you're going to get sluggish, brain fog, hormones are going to get imbalanced, and everything starts to fall apart, and you don't know what happened. So all we're saying is all this massive data coming in of all these podcasts, interviews, YouTube videos, what do you actually need to do for you? We now have the ability to decide that.
So, Kashif, what are the unanswered questions that still challenge you with respect to genetics and the human genome?
Well, I'm diving deep into discovering the mind. And what I'm learning is a lot of the other systems are pretty clear. There's like plumbing around how you clear hormones, how you metabolize foods, how you detoxify your body. What's going on in the brain is far more complex. And it's like it needs a whole other separate, treated as an alien within yourself that it needs its own guide. And what I'm seeing is how all these neurochemicals do so much more than we think. We think of dopamine as a pleasure chemical. If you have a dopamine problem, you might become depressed or an addict. It's also your reward chemical. It's the reason you're hosting this podcast, the desire to do great things, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
a satisfaction chemical that when do I actually stop? How do I know I've done enough? And then these chemicals interlink with each other. And we're now at the point where if I have your DNA, I don't ever need to talk to you to know your personality to a T. I can describe how you behave. Are you irritable? Are you irritating? You know,
Mm-hmm.
is it easy to distract you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a drama queen response?
Mm-hmm.
Because you give things too much meaning and weight, and there's trauma. So all of this is a terminal. So for me, I'm diving more into that. I'm now looking at oxytocin and some of the other uh,
Mm-hmm.
factors that drive personality and mood.
I would, that's interesting. You just said that because I want my viewers to know that I've just come through doing your test, and I want to talk about that today a little bit because it's something that I can personally address and discuss with you now because I'm now one of your victims,
Yeah.
one of your happy victims because it does give you so many insights. Uh, but but now that that's happened, I when I looked back on the test, I thought, well, you talk about serotonin, you talk about dopamine, but you don't talk about oxytocin. And I'm so happy you just said that because I wanted to ask you and I forgot to. So what is the role of oxytocin in with those other neurotransmitters? Oh, I think you also talked about neuroepinephrine, right?
Yeah,
Those
and adrenaline.
and
So
adrenaline.
they're all you just keep painting a bigger picture. So if I tell you, for example, that you just mentioned norepinephrine and there's adrenaline, and how do you experience recall? So something happened a year ago, excuse me, how do you
Mm-hmm.
remember it? Is there
Mm-hmm.
deep emotion attached to it? Is it more logical? Do you remember it at a higher level of detail, or is it more macro and high level? So there's
Mm-hmm.
genetics that drive all of that, and then all of a sudden your perspective is very different than the person you may be speaking to, and that could
Mm-hmm.
create friction. It could put you in a leadership role. It could drag you down, right? So now if you layer on top of that to answer your question, something like oxytocin, it influences that to some degree because that's your love hormone. Like that's how you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing the quality of the emotion. So if you're oxytocin, if you don't experience trauma and you also are deficient with oxytocin, people are going to talk to you like you're a serial killer. You know, like
Right.
you're cold and dry, right? If the opposite is also true, people are going to talk to you like you're way overburdened when it comes to emotion.
Right.
So these things do not they should not be spoken of as siloed individual things because that's not how we operate. And that's why I'm saying the functional interpretation is much more important than this straightforward genetic interpretation.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Qigenics. From stem cell therapy to lifestyle coaching, Qigenics is the perfect place to go for all your health and wellness needs. This health clinic is amazing at getting you personalized medicine and wellness that is unique to you. Use the code Ageless and you'll get 20% off your first service with them. Go to www.qigenix.com to find out more information about these powerful methods. So why it is not in the test? Is it just that you're not far enough along in your assessment of the genetics of that, or to analyze that with individual clients?
Yeah, so there's a couple layers to that answer. One is genetic testing is not as far along as people think it is.
Mm,
You know, you might go by what's called a whole genome sequence, like
mm-hmm,
give me my entire genetic encyclopedia. I
mm-hmm,
can tell you it's still not a whole genome sequence. There's a lot of things in there that are algorithms assuming things. There's certain genes that are very difficult to sequence that are missing. There's certain rare genetic markers that they don't have enough data on, so they don't even report on. So the testing is not where people think it is. This is why I sort of made it a mandate to eliminate all the noise of genetics and only focus on the functional genes, of which there's only about 90. So you have 22,000 genes that make up your genome,
right.
and we're literally only testing for 90 of them because those are the ones that drive the functional systems and pathways. And if you start to layer other stuff, all of a sudden accuracy goes down. You know, all of a
Mm-hmm,
sudden you're not able to go as deep per gene. And let me give you one simple example. Anyone here that's familiar with genetics has probably heard of a SNP, a SNP.
mm-hmm,
That's the variation you're looking for. So 22,000 genes, each one is many thousands of letters long, the actual code. And somewhere along the way, there may be a spelling mistake. So in
mm-hmm,
this location, it's supposed to be a T and it's a C instead. That's
mm-hmm,
called a SNP, that error. That error makes that gene, excuse me, function different. And now you can say this person does this too fast or too slow, whatever that job is. That's what most genetic testing companies test for. There's
mm-hmm,
also something called an indel, an insertion or deletion, which means it's not a spelling mistake, but there's a whole paragraph missing.
mm-hmm,
Or the paragraph was duplicated twice. Now
mm-hmm,
imagine you're reading a book, the difference between a spelling mistake in a single word versus
mm-hmm,
a paragraph missing or a
mm-hmm,
particular page. How does that change the interpretation of the instruction? So we go
mm-hmm.
further. There's also something called a copy number variation, and this is the last of three that I'll tell you. Copy number variation is how many copies of the gene did I get? Forget about an error or a variant or a spelling mistake. You don't even have the gene missing,
Mm-hmm.
entirely missing. Now,
Mhm.
in female health, something as important as hormone metabolism,
Mhm.
and you don't even have the gene that metabolizes the hormone,
Mhm.
and you wonder why, in the same exact environment, you feel different than your friend,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Yeah, so that's the way we go a lot. We focus on what's important, but go a lot deeper into each of those genes.
So does this mean that those of the 5,000 people that have taken your test thus far are going to need to take it again in, let's say, a year or two because of the changes that you're making and your adaptation to all of those 22,000 that may at some point come into play? Not all of them, but the ones that you're adding in, like oxytocin, as an example.
So there are some there's layers to that also. When you log in, as we learn more, we keep updating. So even within the genes that you've been tested for, we
Oh.
we are already learning more. So a year from now, you learn in and log in, and you may see something that you didn't see a year ago because we learned something new.
Oh.
Science is still sort of novel in this world, so we keep learning. Second is there's genes that we've tested you for that we didn't report on because we're still on the back end learning we want to be certain when we tell you what, like
Mm-hmm.
the experience that you had when we went through it, it was like, wow, that's exactly me, right? We want it to be that certain. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's genes that we're testing you for today that aren't being reported on, but in a year from now, you're going to log in and say, hey, wait a second, there's some new gene here that I didn't know about. We're just going to keep adding it. Third layer is there may be some new genes that we need to retest you for in the future because there's new science that we don't know about today, so we didn't bother testing for those genes just to make sure that we test for the minimum possible so we get the maximum accuracy. So
Mm-hmm.
that is the case where maybe every few years you may have to test again, but not so.
So once a client, always a client of DNA company. Once you
Yeah.
sign and you do your first test, you will always be a client and given updates and advice as you go along. And one of the things that I noticed was, and I didn't know this, is that you can contact the company and actually get a concierge medicine advisor. I was lucky enough to have you, but now to other people who are interested in taking your test, just be aware that you can continue along with an actual coach
Yeah.
from the company, a technically competent, either a doctor or some practitioner that will be able to be your coach, right? And you can interact with that person and continue to on your journey. So
This
that's a
was
big
a
plus.
Yeah, this was a big piece that was missing from genetics, which is the geneticists know what they know, the clinicians know what they know, and the two didn't speak. And so there was this gap in the middle. The patient stuck with all this data saying this didn't get me anywhere.
Right.
So we built a training curriculum to be able to teach functional medicine doctors, and many have taken it, but we thought we also need to build a clinic because people expect from us the answers. So let's
Yeah.
actually get them the answer. So we built that clinic. We then and like you said, there's multiple layers. I also, at a personal level, work with sort of celebs, athletes type thing. So if people want to find out more about that, they can. But
Hmm.
I personally trained all of these clinicians, so they know their stuff.
Hmm. Well, so just the other piece of this whole platform is that you also have a division that supports the nutraceuticals, the supplements. Why don't you talk about that for a moment? Because that was something else I wasn't aware of, that you can actually come after your follow up and your counsel with an expert like you to go over your test and interpret it. Now you can then get on an actual protocol that's guided by you, and sometimes it's products that are not in the company's portfolio. But go ahead and tell us a little bit about what are some of the opportunities for people to actually work with the company on products that you select that are specific to that, customized to that particular person.
Yes, so because we think of things from a genetic perspective, when it comes to a problem, we don't necessarily think we need a supplement or a pill to mask the problem.
Mm,
We think, what is the system failure? And let me give you an example. We may be dealing with a young lady that has endometriosis, and she just
mm,
developed a thing. She's like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life with this. Why did this
yeah.
happen? And the medical answer is medication, potentially surgery, right? So what we do is we go deep into the genome to see why is this happening and how do we resolve that? And it could be that she's more estrogen dominant. She just makes way too much estrogen, right? And it could be that the metabolite of that is a toxic metabolite. So when women have their menstrual cycles, before clearing the hormones, you first convert it into a metabolite. You convert it to something else. And some of those versions are potentially toxic. And if you add on top of that things like birth control pills and hormone disruption, then the total volume becomes too much. So if you are that woman, then instead of treating the endometriosis, if we know that estrogen dominance is the issue, I know that the CYP19A1 gene takes your testosterone and converts it to estrogen. And I may also know that you have the ultra fast version of that gene. And I
Mm,
may also know that there's certain foods or ingredients that change the expression of that gene, that make
mm,
it slow down. So
mm,
instead of masking the endometriosis, I can give you a cocktail that manages your gene expression. It
mm,
slows that pathway down. Now all of a sudden, you're dealing with the root cause, and the endometriosis over time kind of goes away because there's
mm,
nothing fueling it, right? So that's how we think about supplementation. Figure out the root cause, support the system, not the symptom, and
mm,
then it's usually not just that one thing goes away, other things also go away. It's
mm.
like, oh, I'm sleeping better, my mood is better, I don't have brain fog, because the same inflammatory insults trigger all of those things.
Let's just for a moment summarize all the areas that you focus on and in the test, so that people understand all the comprehensive systems that are being covered. So start with the neuro, because that was the one that you're still challenged by. But let's go through the systems and talk about each one a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, neuro is really important because it's hard to fix something if you don't know how you think. And often we find people that have been stuck for a long time, they're actually not stuck with the health problem, they're actually stuck with their perception of it and their ability to actually execute on what the doctor told them or follow through, or maybe not follow through too much. Maybe they burn themselves out, right? So often understanding your executive function, as we call it, how you think,
Mm-hmm,
really helps in terms of working with people and helping yourself. Then we
mm-hmm,
look at diet and nutrition. So, should I be keto, vegan, carnivore? How does my body actually metabolize all these macronutrients and
mm-hmm,
micronutrients, vitamin C, D, zinc, like what I need to be doing with my B12s and my folic acid, folinic acid, all of these things are sort of driven by genetic pathways that help the metabolism of it. Then
mm-hmm,
we look at sleep, and this is a big area where we actually didn't even think that it was a problem we were going to solve. But every time we were working with somebody with a chronic condition, they would say they're sleeping better. And we had to dig into why. And the same pathways that drive your mood, the same pathways that drive your detoxification, the same pathways that drive your hormones even affect your sleep. And so all of a sudden we can reinterpret those same genes for a different purpose and fix people's sleep quality.
mm-hmm,
The fourth area is hormones. So everything about your hormone dominance, what you make, hormone quality, how toxic, hormone clearance, the detoxification pathways, which really answers the big elephant in the medical room, which is female healthcare sucks really bad, right?
mm-hmm,
It is really, really underserved. And this is why, because when you have research done on men and that's primarily where medical research is done, who have a daily hormone cycle, and when women have a monthly hormone cycle that looks very different, those two
mm-hmm,
things don't fit together, right? The research doesn't fix the problem. The fifth area is everything about chronic disease, aging, how you have propensity and the ways to think about inflammation and what that may do to you and how to prevent certain things, or if you have them, how to reverse them. And the last area is immunity and inflammation. So innate cellular health. What's going on at the cellular level? All of the potential threats that can cause inflammation and affect your immune system, and how do you work on those? Then there's an additional report that takes all of what I just said and reinterprets it for the context of longevity.
mm-hmm,
How do I take this stuff and add 15 years to my life?
mm-hmm,
My bone, my brain, my skin,
mm-hmm.
my cells. Like, how do I take all this for that purpose? So it's kind of like a bonus report that does all of that.
Can you actually tell people their biological age then at the end of their testing? And because that's what you're almost saying just now.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, we
autolo-
can, but through a different test.
okay.
So biological aging um, is a different, it's not genetics, it's epigenetics,
Yes. Oh,
right? So
could stop for a moment just to, I want people to understand the difference between the two.
sure. So genetics is, here's what version of what gene you have. Your human instruction manual. Your cells read that manual to understand how to do all their jobs. For
Mm-hmm.
making hormones, to making chemicals, every single thing that's going on in your body is driven by an instruction manual called your DNA. That's genetics. Epigenetics is based on what you're doing, what you ate, who you talk to, how scared you are, how happy you are. Your genes are constantly expressing up and down, meaning, like I said, you might have the fast version of the conversion of testosterone into estrogen, a certain version of the gene. That's genetic. So your baseline, if you're doing everything normal, you're making too much estrogen. Then you may take something that slows that gene down, and that's epigenetics, that's expression. But the minute you stop taking that thing, you're going to go back to where you started, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a change, it's augmenting, it's expression. It's how is it expressing right now based on inputs. And now, based on measuring all your genetic expression, we have a very good sense of your biological age. How far along are you? If you look at the actual physical structure of DNA, it looks like it's meant to last about 120 years. So we look like we are wired for 120 years of life if we do
Mm-hmm.
everything right.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to make wrong choices, you take those years away.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's how to think about the two. The epigenetics test is completely different. I mean, I can send you links with all the stuff if people want access. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the foundation and everything we've been talking about up until now is the actual genetic test.
So if you were guiding someone who had never done the test and starting from scratch, what would be the steps that you would advise just a normal, healthy person, not someone who's sick, but someone who's healthy and wants to stay that way? What would be those steps in
So I
working
would
with?
say the genetic test itself is what directs every future decision, right?
Okay.
So from even things as recreational as should I wear cosmetics or not? Like
Mm-hmm.
how well do you detoxify those things, right? So everything that you have to think about in your health and wellness, your DNA can kind of drive what's the right decision for me at a surface level. Now, if you want to become a pro and really know how to answer any question that may come your way, like, oh, I'm shifting from working to retiring and I want to go on, a hike in Africa. So I need to get into the best shape I've ever been in. How do you actually do that for you? How do you get to your actual goal? That's where you might consider working with one of our practitioners or coaches on a more concierge program to dive deeper. And the only reason I say that is because there's some things we know that we're not allowed to say because FDA and Health Canada won't let us, right?
Yes.
Which is normal when you're doing testing. There's certain things that are consumer and there's certain things that are more clinical and diagnostic that you cannot say unless you're actually working with somebody as a patient, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is the possibility. So the report itself will change your life. There is the possibility to dive much deeper into the data, like kind of like what you and I did, if you,
Mm-hmm. If you choose.
yeah, if you choose. And who is the right person for that? It's either a health concern, like I'm sick, or my mom had Alzheimer's. I don't want that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That person should work with a coach. Or
Mm-hmm.
it's like I'm high performance. I'm an athlete. I'm an executive. I'm a super mom with 4 kids. Like I
Mm-hmm.
need to be at my best potential.
Mm-hmm.
That's the person that needs it.
Yeah.
Uh, the third area I would say is sort of that, biohacker longevity seeker health enthusiast, which is, I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff. I'm going to be buying a lot of supplements, doing a lot of classes, watching a lot of podcasts. How do I
Mm-hmm.
prioritize and not waste a whole bunch of money?
Right.
For that person, there's a really good return because all of a sudden you've understood your DNA where now you can go arm yourself, right, to know how to use it as a tool. Those are kind of the three people that I would advise seek coaching.
So I have a question though, because I want people to really understand that. Well, let me back up and ask you it more open endedly. What is the best advice that you have ever received with respect to genetics, with respect to your world?
You mean in terms of actual advice for me?
Yeah, yeah. Who was who? Well, you don't have to tell us who, but what is the best advice you've ever received, and how have you applied that?
So the biggest aha moment for me was that there's a gene called GSTM1, which is a primary first line of defense and detoxifier of the gut. So
Mm,
when you eat anything, there's certain things that come along with it that are not meant to enter your bloodstream. How
mm-hmm,
efficiently do you do that process? I'm missing that gene. Don't even
mm,
have it. So now, when I used to work in the city with my business partner and go to lunch every day and not be worried about packaging and oils and all this stuff, Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
migraines, eczema, depression, even it would affect your brain, the gut-brain connection, and
Right,
thought that I actually had all of those problems,
right.
right? So what I understood that no, I just have zero detox system in my gut, and I have to learn how to eat, and I have to add certain supplementation to support detox because I do have to go to weddings and dinners and go to lunches with people, and I can't control what I'm eating. So then there's certain supplements I can take. Major, major impact in terms of how I feel. I
Mm-hmm.
went from bi-weekly or monthly debilitating migraines where I had to sleep for 2 days,
Mm.
on and off, to I might get a headache once every 6 months because I kind of slipped and made a mistake, right? But now I know why. So that was the biggest one for me.
So, if it's just any other person who's facing symptoms rather than the actual root problem because they don't know what the root problem is, like you didn't know that you didn't have the gene and you just knew that you had symptoms. So,
Yeah,
how do you translate symptoms into understanding the root cause of those symptoms that can then address what you just said, for example, with your GI tract? How do you go from knowing you have symptoms like a migraine headache to getting
yeah,
to the understanding of what, because this is what allopathic medicine does not do, and
yeah,
we all know that. It basically tries to cure symptoms and basically does it by giving you a pill, a
yeah,
pharmaceutical drug. So let's dive deep into the because everybody has symptoms. There
yeah,
isn't a walking on the planet that doesn't have something that is bothering them. So,
yeah.
but
Right now, I think 66% of Americans are on medication, which is
wow.
absurd. You have a $4 trillion healthcare industry in the most powerful and wealthiest empire that's ever been on this planet. And that's how sick the population is, right? Because of exactly what you just said, which
Yep.
is the belief is I am healthy, excuse me, until I have a symptom, and it's the
Mm-hmm.
doctor's job to get rid of the symptom.
Mm-hmm.
That's healthcare today. When really that symptom, whatever caused it to trigger, probably started 10, 12, 15 years prior to,
Mm-hmm.
but your body fought it. We are resilient, right? We
Mm.
have mitochondria that fight things. We have detox systems, anti-inflammatory systems. Then eventually you lose the battle and it turns into a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I think about it is a little bit different than what you said. We're kind of ignoring the symptom when we're looking at genetics. We're just looking for the system failure. What
Yes.
does, yeah, where does my body not do a good job?
Yes.
And let me give you an example. Like we may say that somebody's suffering from anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a symptom.
Like
So we're not,
your niece, remember, and
yes,
you talk about her in your book.
for perfect example. So let's use her example. So in her case, anxiety, we ignored the symptom and we said, what systems are failing and
Mm-hmm.
why would that equal the way she feels?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at hormone metabolism, if your hormones aren't balanced, that can dramatically affect your mood in certain weeks of the month.
Mm-hmm.
Then look at the fact that she was a horrible vitamin D metabolizer, right? And if you combine those two things, it equals hormone imbalance, which affects your mood. And then,
Mm-hmm.
well, why anxiety? Why not something else? Well, because she is a very inefficient binder of dopamine, which is what makes you feel satisfied. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
just very hard for her to get satisfaction from things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that combination, plus now, this happened, by the way, in peak COVID when she
Mm-hmm.
hadn't been outside in 5 months and got zero sunlight, zero vitamin D, and she's already a bad metabolizer. So that was the epigenetic trigger, the lifestyle trigger that
Right.
caused it that time. So that's the way, again, not looking for anxiety gene, looking for what systems are failing, what are her habits, environment, nutrition, lifestyle. When you combine all of that, how does that equal the way she's feeling? And now
Mm-hmm.
the solution becomes very clear. It's not an anxiety pill. It's upping her vitamin D and her dopamine response. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all we did. And she never had the problem again.
So this is what I'm saying, that the root cause, you address the root cause. You didn't
Yes,
just accept it. Oh, she has anxiety, and now we'll give her a Valium or whatever they give you for a pill to that's just a band-aid. But
exactly.
you went deeper to the root cause, and then when you fix the root cause, then guess what? The symptom goes away. So
Exactly.
so
And potentially other symptoms also.
Right. Right. Because root causes can cause a lot of malfunctioning.
Usually do. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does lab testing, the blood work, parallel genetic testing? How do they work in a symbiotic way to come up with answers that are consistent? Because what if you have a lab test that's inconsistent with the result of your genetics?
So genetics is foundational, meaning here's how your body does the job. Lab work is where are you at today?
Mm-hmm.
So if I tell you that, or if you tell me that your lab work says that you have good vitamin D levels,
Mm-hmm.
but
Which
you
I
still
did.
have, sorry, yeah, because it did, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
then, yeah, but potentially you may still have mood issues in the winter. You may still feel a lot better in the sun. So there's some symptoms of something else, which is I need more vitamin D. But why is
Mm-hmm.
my lab work saying that my vitamin D levels are good? Because the genetic pathway for vitamin D is step one, you need to convert the D2 that comes from the sun into D3. That's the first
Right.
step. You
Right.
then need to transport what you just made to the actual cell. It's in the blood right now. You haven't actually used it. And
Right.
then you need to bind it. So you may be a great metabolizer of D2 into D3, and the levels in your blood are awesome. But
Yeah.
did you actually get it to the cell where it's needed? And do you
Mm-hmm.
actually bind it? And so
Mm-hmm.
genetically, we can be a lot more precise in terms of dosage, frequency, and what your lab work actually means in your context. Not a, keep in mind, lab work is all one size fits all. We
Mm-hmm.
believe this is how humans work, and this is
Mm-hmm.
where, and that's why lab work has a range
Mm-hmm.
between 1 to 5 is normal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 1 to 5 sounds like two very different things to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But 1 to 5 is normal because it has to be a one size fits all. So what we're saying is you can use your genetics to understand if you're a 4.2, what does that mean for you? For
Mm-hmm.
somebody else, that may not mean anything. For you, it might mean a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. So you can work with the lab outcomes. However, you don't accept them because it's just a point in time. You don't have necessarily accept them as the almighty truth, because the genetic results are far more, what you call it, strategic.
Yeah, they're more certain, but the genetics will really what the genetics will do is tell you how to better interpret the lab work,
Hmm.
right? So I'm not saying no to lab work. Measuring is great. I'm just
Hmm.
saying that get away from the range of 1 to 5 and the one size fits all and know what that lab work actually means for you. It's a very
Hmm.
different thing. Another simple example. There's a gene called APOE, which people call the Alzheimer's gene, and it
Right.
determines really how efficiently your body transports lipids, cholesterol. So if you have the bad version of that gene, you don't do such a good job moving cholesterol around your body, which
Hmm.
means that your baseline is a higher cholesterol number. So when you go to the doctor for blood work, they're going to tell you your cholesterol is high, but it's not necessarily bad news for you, right?
That's
Because
right.
your genetics just make it high. You didn't do anything to cause that. That's just who you are. So it just
Yeah.
helps you interpret the data better.
That is such an important point that you just made, because so much of the pharmaceutical industry is making billions on statin drugs. So telling even young kids, that they have high cholesterol, when in fact, cholesterol, people oftentimes don't realize that cholesterol is good as long as it's not the bad kind, the LDL, and as long as you're using it efficiently. So, for example, I just went with Dr. Dan Goodenow. He does a lot of work with. I think I mentioned him to you. He does work with plasmalogens,
Yeah.
and my cholesterol always comes out high in quotes when I do the blood work. Well, high for me is about 217 last blood test, and if I very rarely am I ever below 200, which is what they say is the norm. And actually, he said that would be hugely dangerous for me, because my body is using that 217 score very efficiently to transport the cholesterol to the places it's needed,
Right.
like the brain and the gut and so forth. So you're saying the exact same thing, I believe, is that if you're 217, that's your result. That's not necessarily bad. Just your list. Don't necessarily listen to what the drug industry and the allopathic medicine industry is trying to tell you, that you need to be 200 or below.
You need to know why it's that number.
Mm-hmm.
The number is a starting point, and you need to ask why for me, because this it's not the same reason, right? So, and once
Exactly.
you know why, you can better interpret.
Well, and also it's the size of the particles that's the most concerning. And as you and I
Yeah.
talked about the arterial vessel walls and how plastic they are, right? How resilient they are. Those are more of the interpretations that you need to be asking about. And your ratio, like my ratio is 3.4. Well, that's actually low risk for cardiovascular disease, correct? And the
Those are excellent ways to use blood work more efficiently. A
yeah,
simple number in a range is too sort of
arbitrary.
elementary. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's also arbitrary, like you said, because now the doctor has to just randomly guess why you're on one end of the range or the other. And the normal, when you take a look at something like thyroid, for example, the ranges are absolutely ridiculous.
yes,
They're literally ridiculous. You're borderline, like, not surviving, but you're just in a nice range. You're told normal, go home. Everyone needs personalization around things like thyroid and hormones. Uh, and so, short answer, if it's about a range and a good or bad, it's not enough. But the way you were talking about going deeper into blood work and looking for very specific markers, that's the
hmm.
better blood work.
I'm so glad you mentioned thyroid. I think it's the most underdiagnosed condition in
Yep.
humanity, and so many people don't understand. The doctor tells them to go home, you're fine, and yet they've never really tested their thyroid in the way probably it needs to be tested, which is the Barnes method, which is putting um, a thermometer under your arm before you get up in the morning, and doing that for 5 days in a row and seeing what your temperature is. Isn't that a much more efficient way to see whether you're parathyroid or not?
Yeah, you can. There's a lot of functional ways to understand your body. You can also use the traditional blood work, but just interpret it better, right?
Yes,
To know what it really means. There's functional medicine doctors that the exact same blood work that your allopathic doctor said is normal, they're going to tell you this is not normal at all, right?
yes,
Based on your lifestyle, based on your environment. Again, a sprinkle of personalization,
yes,
right? Based on your context. That's the first important question is,
yes.
okay, here's this information. In what context? In
Mm-hmm,
somebody that eats donuts at Walmart all day, or somebody like you who's doing everything right,
mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And somebody, so that context is key. So, yeah, so it is about functional tests, but it's also about just better interpreting the existing tests.
Well, knowledge is power. And that's the more knowledge we have, also, we have more power, but we also have more confusion because there's so many different opinions. So, you have to be discerning and know who to listen to. And so that brings up the science. So, how often do you get challenged or I shouldn't say how often, but do you get challenged by the scientific community for the DNA testing, and how do you respond to that?
Daily, every
I,
single day. Why? Because here's what I've realized was broken. Now, keep in mind, some people listening may not know, the reason why I started this company is because I was sick, right? And I used my genetics to heal myself, and so I ended up investing into it and building it. And so I had to also go through the experience that genetics is kind of underwhelming. It doesn't work. And I realized it's such a powerful tool. This is my genome. Why am I getting these, you got an 80% chance of this, 10% chance of that, and I still don't know what to do about it type answers? And so I realized what was broken is that the research model was the same as the pharmaceutical research model, the evidence-based, double-blind, placebo type thing where you're looking for averages.
Mhm,
And you're taking this hyper-personalized thing, DNA, and converting it into averages,
mhm,
completely defeating the purpose. And so when
mhm,
I talk to clinicians, scientists, I speak at a lot of events, I speak at medical events, a lot of online summits type thing. And it always starts off, where's the evidence? Where's the research? Where's this or that? So, and I had to show them that their research model doesn't work for personalization. What you need to do for personalization, which is exactly what I did, is speak to each individual person as a separate study. I need to you. It's called N of one. If I can't fix your problem, I haven't used genetics properly. And
Mm-hmm.
so in our research model, we did that 7,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
One by one, by one, by one, by one, 7,000 different people, interviewed them, sat with them, got their medical history, learned about their food, learned about their relationships, everything we needed to know about putting their genetics in a context so that we could figure out how the epigenetic habits equals in combination with the genetics, how they feel. So now when I explain that to clinicians, then they start to open up and be honest about, yeah, I'm not really happy with what I'm doing in my clinic. I'm just kind of managing people's disease. I really wish I could help them, and then they end up learning and training and using the tool. Uh, but one thing I can tell you is post COVID, there's a very big wave of clinicians wanting more.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-COVID, it was still a very staunch, here's what academia believes, prove it to me you're wrong. And we would prove
Yes.
it, but now it's like they're craving it. Like, I'm sick of what I'm doing. I want to shut my practice down. I know there's a better way, and they're coming to us. So things have changed.
Mm. So how are you going to incorporate that influx of people, of doctors, into your training?
So this is a unique thing we did, and I know you started this podcast by introducing me as the CEO. And I recently decided actually to step down, and Tracy Wood, who was our COO, who has many years of healthcare. So I'm an innovator. I built it, but I'm not a healthcare specialist, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know the industry that well. She does. She comes from that. So I said to her, I need to keep talking about this. I need to go out there. The world just needs to know. I don't need to be running the company. You'll do a much better job with that. So I literally should come on, and that's what we did about a month and a half ago. I
I didn't.
literally, yeah, I know you didn't know. Sorry, I never told you that, but it's
Right.
like I literally came off the role, even though I'm the founder, and Tracy took over so that I can just focus on advocacy, going out there, speaking, teaching, letting the world know that there's something better. And whether they decide to work with us or anyone else, it doesn't matter. As long as we're changing the way healthcare works, because I can see even for myself, we're constantly teetering the edge between health and poor health, right? And someone who's in the poor bucket doesn't know how close they are to good health. A few tweaks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And someone who's healthy doesn't know how close they are to poor health. So we need
Mm-hmm.
to understand what these things are. Take me, for example. I've done everything right. All of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden, I have this eczema and skin inflammation.
Mm.
All
And
of a
you,
sudden,
yeah.
right? And you would think that I would never be sick because I'm doing everything right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually slipped. I started taking it easy with my diet.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't pay attention to some of the chemicals that I was breathing in because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I've cured myself. There's no cure. This thing that you walk around and need constant maintenance. You have to do it right all the time.
Mm-hmm. So just a kind of a rhetorical question, but what about your genetics helped you to make that decision to step down? What genetics would you say supported who you are as a person to make a decision that's that monumental?
So there's a clear answer to that. One is my COMT protein is hyper fast. So COMT clears things. It clears hormones, it clears toxins, and it clears neurochemicals. So it's very easy for me to think like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost sometimes to a level of a problem. It's a little too quick, right? It's also because my brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, which speaks to neuroplasticity, is hyper efficient. So I'm able to move on from things without them having a lot of meaning. It's not
Mm.
a weight. It's not like my head is spinning thinking about it. It's more like get it, move on, pure logic,
So
right?
you make decisions in a very defined way, and a very articulate way. You know when you have to do something,
Yeah,
and
and
you take
yes,
action. Don't just think about it and dwell on it and procrastinate. You actually go through the action to make it happen. So that's
and
that's good entrepreneur.
yeah, and I also have genetics around binding emotion, and so I also really care.
Mm,
right? So when it comes to a promise that I made to our customers, our investors, I know that Tracy will do a better job than me right now in the next phase of what we have to do. We have to take all of what's built and turn it into a healthcare company.
mm-hmm.
Putting the ego aside, it's like this is the right choice. So, and because I care enough to actually make the right choice, and that's also genetically driven by emotion.
I noticed in when we talked about the test results for me that you mentioned a superpower. So that kind of fascinated me because I never thought, I guess being humble, I never actually defined what I might have as called superpowers, and
Right.
yet it was consistent. What you said was consistent with who I believe I am, like the attention to detail and the decisiveness and the entrepreneurial the things that we qualities that you and I share. So, what would you say are your superpowers?
I would say it's my reward-seeking behavior, warrior mentality that I really uh, am constantly seeking more and more and more, which allows me to take big risks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So crash and burn or do something great. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's also my the same thing that you have, by the way, serotonin dysregulation, which allows me to see the world at a higher level of detail, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that I make better decisions because
Mm-hmm.
I see things that other people don't see. It allows me to track things better too because I give value to stuff that other people don't even know is there.
Mm-hmm.
That combination leads to a profile, which I also told you the same about yourself, that we call high functioning anxiety.
Yes.
It sounds like a funny term, and what it
Yes.
means is I don't have anxiety that burdens me or makes me not want to get out of bed. I have an anxiety that makes me want to never stop. It's like a fire in my gut. High
Right.
functioning anxiety, it's a drive.
Right.
So
And
yeah, the
perfect.
wiring I have, right?
Yeah. Sorry. And the perfectionism that goes along with that. That you don't
Yes.
want to ever do anything that you're not completely satisfied with the outcome, or at least with the qualities that you brought to the effort. You may not always get what you want at the outcome, but you put in all the effort to do it, but with a vision.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I just got flashed that we're run out of time, but I want everybody to know about your book. So I have it here. It's called I hope I can, that's going on the screen. DNA Way, the DNA Way. By the way, it's a cool cover. Whoever
Well,
designed your cover was very, very creative. I love it.
thank
Um,
you.
so look, if you want to get Kashif's book, everybody that's watching, you can order it on Amazon, right, Kashif?
Yeah, it's everywhere. Barnes and Noble, Amazon, everywhere. Yeah.
I highly recommend. I'm telling you, this book changed my thinking, and it's a very touching and very personalized account. And I just realized I never did get to talk to you and have you explain your history and how you got on this path. But we'll do that. We'll have another time together. But
Sure.
in the book, everybody that's listening, you can hear about the journey that Kashif took that is so mesmerizing, and how he took adversity and created opportunity. So I highly encourage you to get his book and start there. And then as far as the testing, if people want to, how would they go about getting your test?
So there's two things. My personal website is a shortened version of my name, cashkhanofficial.com. So KASHKHAN official.com.
Okay.
And you can go there to work with me if you'd like, or follow me on Instagram, same thing, Cash Khan Official. If you
Okay.
just want the test, the DNAcompany.com. The test might also be on my website, by the way. But
Okay.
if you want to go to the DNAcompany.com, you can get it there also.
Okay.
Uh, so it depends really what somebody needs.
And it's a saliva test, so it's really easy. I mean,
Really easy, yeah.
you spit into a tube and you send it back, and they send this test almost to every country in the world, so it's readily available, and the results come usually 5 to 6 weeks later, because of course they're all overwhelmed, becoming more overwhelmed because more and more people are taking the opportunity. I meant to ask you, we have a Michele Recommends on our website on the agelessandtimeless.com, and almost all of our guests want to incentivize our viewers with something that will basically, get them to understand more in a direct way, an actionable way, what they just heard. Is there anything that you, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot on this, but is there anything that you would like to suggest for our viewers?
Incentive in terms of, like a discount on buying the test?
Yeah, either on the test or maybe your book or something that you think would be a way for people to be encouraged, because everybody wants to,
Sure.
not that they wouldn't do it without, but the Michele recommends the whole point of that is, to get people to become more aware in a direct way by
Sure.
through
Yeah, the
product.
book I have no control over because it's a publisher that published the book, right? But in terms of the test, yeah, let's set up if you go to thednacompany.com/Hughes, perhaps, your
Well,
last name.
to use ageless.
Ageless. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So the dnacompany.com/ageless, and I'll
yeah,
make sure that we set up a discount code for you. We also want to respect your time for listening and learning and appreciate that you want to,
right.
change things. So I'll get that set up.
Okay, and you and I can work on that later, and then we'll have my assistant Alexis put the offer
Sure.
on the website. Okay, perfect. Well, you have been amazing, and I think this has just been the primer for people to understand the value of understanding who they are, and that the most important, I think, one of the most important points that's come out of this is that just because you get a blueprint doesn't mean that you can't change your profiles of health. So don't ever accept just that, oh my gosh, I have the APOE gene or whatever, and I'm going to get Alzheimer's. No, that isn't the case. That is why the test is giving you guidelines, but that you then take those guidelines and work with the company or your healthcare provider, and you use lifestyle to be able to adapt that to the functional level as you described. I hope that's a good summary. If
For
it isn't,
sure.
okay.
Ultimately,
Well,
what we're saying is that disease and the pace at which you age is a choice, right?
that's
And
right.
the things you do every day, every second, take you towards or away from disease and aging. So let's just always make the right choice.
That's perfect. I'd love to end on that high note. Thank you, Kashif, and have a beautiful day. And thank you again. I want to come back and maybe sometime in early 2024. I want to do a follow up and actually maybe even later in 2024 because you're working on some changes that are going to occur with the testing. So I want to,
Yeah.
of course, be involved with that directly with you, but also for my viewers. So thank you
Sure.
again for being
Pleasure.
so generous with your time. Take care.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.